Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. I am Andrew Kennedy. I'm a data and AI consultant with Thorogood. I also head up our global AI practice. Along with Sushma today, we'll be talking about the topic of can we do this with Copilot. So Sushma works with me in the Singapore office of Thorogood as a data and AI consultant as well. She's going to be helping demo some of the things that you could do with Copilot in Power BI specifically. So we'll see that a bit later on. No, the inspiration from today's session came from a lot of the discussions that we're having with various different customers and contacts that we have recently. So we run a series of events, for example, and at the end of one of our recent events, a number of different people came up really and talked to us about some different examples of what they're trying to do with AI. And a big question that we're getting repeatedly across these conversations is, can we do this with Copilot? And so we got a group of leaders in Thorogood to sit down and think about some of the different ways that customers are interacting with AI applications and AI tools. And to think about as part of that, where does Copilot sit in the range of different options that we have when we're using AI? So when we were doing that, we started jotting down some of the different kind of ways that you can interact with AI. And we'll start with some of the Microsoft Copilot tools that people are interested in. So the first, from a timeline perspective at least, was GitHub Copilot. That was the one that came out first. GitHub Copilot is specifically aimed around coding. It was very quickly recognized as a really good tool to help you with coding from an AI perspective. And off the back of that, then Microsoft started releasing some of the other Copilot-branded tools that they have. So one that a lot of people will be familiar with will be the Microsoft 365 Copilot. It actually comes in two flavors. So there's Microsoft 365 Copilot Chat, which is a bit like the Microsoft version of ChatGPT, if you like. There's also Microsoft 365 Copilot, which brings some of those capabilities into the documents you're working in Excel, PowerPoint, Word, even into things like SharePoint and Teams, and able to interact with AI and use AI across different documents that you have access to in your organization. On top of that, then there are a few specific Copilot tools that Microsoft have. So one that we're going to see today is Copilot in Microsoft Fabric, which brings Copilot into really all of the different tools in Microsoft Fabric, but particularly Power BI is one that we're seeing a lot of interest in. But there are also Copilot tools in the likes of Dynamics and some of the other Microsoft offerings as well. And then when we were talking it through, we didn't want to just stop at the Microsoft tools. We wanted to think wider than that. What are the different options that you have? So the first is to recognize that in the category of general AI assistants, obviously people are familiar with OpenAI's ChatGPT tool, probably the most popular on the market. And then also tools like Google's Gemini and Anthropic's Claude.ai tool. So various different tools that you can interact with, really typing in your question, getting some sort of response from AI. And then we have that category of AI add-ins, if you like. So thinking about something like Microsoft 365 Copilot in Excel and PowerPoint and Word. And then there are other other examples where companies are bringing AI into existing tools. And then on the other side, there are companies that are developing entirely new tools or entirely new interfaces around AI. So Cursor is a popular one for coding. Adobe have created Adobe Firefly if you want to do image editing manipulation using, just focusing on the AI in that interface. And then Jasper AI is an example that you might be familiar with from kind of marketing applications and so on. One that's maybe more enterprise focused in that sense. So a range of different ways to interact with AI tools that you're bringing in from outside your organization. But as we were talking it through, then that was kind of the next big divide that we came to. So what I talked about so far are tools that you can buy effectively out of the box or bring them into your organization. But we're also seeing a lot of examples where we're working with customers to create bespoke applications around specific processes or specific business cases in an organization. The first category of those really is AI workbenches. We've called them that. It's not an official title. But really we're talking about things like internal chat tools, companies' own versions of a ChatGPT style interface, or internal endpoints or framework patterns that create a pattern for different teams to coalesce around and use AI through, common frameworks with common logging, monitoring and governance, even though then they can be used across different use cases and different patterns. Then we're seeing a number of places that we're building point applications around specific business cases. And I'll show you a bit later some consumer insight analysis that really is specifically around that business application. And then as we get into specific applications and specific processes, that opens up the opportunity in some cases to automate things in the background. If we know what the task is already and we can automate the different steps of that, then it doesn't even need a user to go in and kick it off every time. It can be triggered by, say, a document being uploaded that needs to be reviewed or triggered on a time scale. So it's running once a day or once an hour or so on. Now, for today, for this question, can we do this with Copilot? We're going to focus really on the Microsoft Copilot tools, because when people are talking about Copilot, really, these are the ones that typically we see they mean either Microsoft 365 Copilot or Copilot Chat, and Copilot in Microsoft Fabric or Copilot in Power BI. So we'll focus on those for today. I will just acknowledge at this stage that some people may be familiar with Microsoft's Copilot Studio. That really extends the Copilot capabilities into building some of those more bespoke point applications. But really at that stage, you're building out a custom application using some of the Microsoft tooling. What we're interested in here is how far can you take it really with some of the out-of-the-box tools that Microsoft Copilot tools give you. The other thing I'll call out before we get into talking about specific examples here is when we had that conversation where we're thinking about what are some of the different drivers for which of the different categories of tools you choose in any scenario. And the list we came up with is quite long. I don't think this covers everything either. The big thing that we noticed as we were talking it through is different organizations will have different priorities, both at the organization level, but then they'll have even more specific priorities for particular use cases. So we'll pick out a couple of these later and talk them through. But mostly I'll say just a lot of different considerations about which tools you want to use in which scenario. So to talk about Copilot with a bit more specificity, let's take a look at a specific business case example where we've been working with a global consumer pharma company. We'd already been working with them on a series of existing reports and data sets that we built out with them on Power BI, helping them analyze across various different key performance indicators for their organization. But moving on from that, what we wanted to consider was how do we support users to navigate the reports and data that we built and find what's relevant to them. As we're expanding the user base, we want to think about how we get users right to the information in the reports that are going to be most relevant. And the question there is there anything in Copilot and Power BI that will help us with that? What can we make use of within that tooling to achieve the goals of that project? So what are the things that they're trying to achieve? We want to get quick answers to some of the known questions. So when someone comes in, they know the question, how can we get that answer quickly? Can we then find some relevant reports? Out of that set of reports that we've already built, can we find the relevant ones based on the area that they're interested in? And then how do we draw attention to the specific data points within that should be of interest? Maybe not the question they're coming in to ask, but can we help them think about the things that they should be looking into? So I'll talk in a bit about how we've helped them use Copilot and understand how they can use Copilot better to address those aims. But I think it's a good opportunity now to take a look at a demo, and Sushma will show not the case with this customer because we can't show you their data, but she will take a look at Copilot on a set of data that we can show you.
Hey everyone. So I'm going to show you all a really quick demo of the kind of things you can achieve with Copilot in Power BI. So I'm in Power BI service now, and I've opened a report that I've built on the sales data set of a hypothetical company that handles import and export of specialty foods from around the world. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to click on the Copilot option here, and I'm going to ask for help to find something that I'm looking for in this report. So imagine I'm someone from the leadership team. I want to understand the sales of different product categories. So I'm going to ask Copilot, help me understand the total sales by product category. And Copilots come back with a quick response with the sales across different categories, such as beverages, dairy products, meat, and so on. And if you see, it also includes a citation for me to refer to a visual it's responding this based off. And if you see, it's also responded in dollar sales when I have both dollar sales and unit sales values in this visual. And I wonder how Copilot knew what I would be more interested to see. But let me come back to that later. What I'm going to do next is I'm particularly interested in analyzing the sales of dairy products because I've noticed some trends in the past and I want to see how we're performing this year. So I'm going to ask Copilot, what is the sales trend for dairy products? And it's checking the underlying data and coming back with a response. And it's telling me that there were several notable peaks, such as early February, mid-April, and August. And it's also describing a few other periods of lower sales. And it's pointing me to a visual I can find this information. Interestingly, what it's done is it's filtered the first visual just for dairy products because that's what I'm interested in, because the visual had the details of overall sales. So it's filtered it for dairy products for me. So what I can do next is if I want to understand this even more in detail, so say I want to find out more about the recent spike in August, I'm going to ask Copilot, which countries contributed to this spike in August 2025? Because it said that the most recent spike was in August, and it's come back to me with some details that the countries that contributed to dairy product sales in August 2025 were Germany, USA, and Austria, and it's pointing me again to a visual as a citation. So if I click on that, it's highlighting this visual for me, and it's telling me the countries that contributed to the sales. So what Copilot is doing for you here is the hard work of bringing together different data points that would allow you to see what some of the key trends were. But as a user, you will still need to review that and take a judgment on whether that explains the spike or not, right? So what this helps me understand is the trends across different countries. And what I can do now is I can work with the respective country teams to dig deeper and decide how we want to handle this. So next, I'm going to ask something that I actually don't see in this report page. So I'm going to ask Copilot, can you show me the purchase trend of Quickstop? So Quickstop is actually a customer of mine that I've been dealing with recently. So just want to see this to understand how I should continue engaging with them. So I've asked this question to Copilot. So let me see what it comes back with. So if you see, it's given me a visual that it's generated to explain the purchase trends of Quickstop over the last few years, and it's highlighting where it's seen notable trends. For example, it says March, April, September 2024, and how it's looking like in 2025 as well. And it's also telling me how Copilot arrived at this response by saying what data it's used and what filters it's applied for coming up with this visual. So that's useful to know if I want to do further analysis as well, right? So we've seen a few responses now that Copilot has come up with. But what's also useful to know is that, as in the case of any AI solution, the data needs to be configured and set up in a way that can enable Copilot to get the most out of your data. And I'll show you now how I did that to enable the kind of analysis that I showed you just now. So I'm going to switch to Power BI desktop now, where I've actually built this report. So once I've linked my Power BI report in the desktop tool to the workspace that has Copilot capacity enabled, what I can do next is I can click on this prep data for AI option here. And you can see here that I can see a few features of preparing data for AI. So the first one is simplify the data schema, and it's going to help me select the tables that I want to expose to Copilot. So for today's analysis, I don't need Copilot to have access to my employee data set. So I'm going to limit this from being exposed to Copilot. So I have not selected the employee table here. And next, if you see, there's an option to set up verified answers, and it's prompting me to go to visual and do this. So what I'm going to do is go to this visual, and I'm going to set up verified answer. So I can say that when somebody asks about sales trend, I want Copilot to always pick up data from this visual. So I can select this option here and click on apply. And next, I have the option to add AI instructions, where I have option to apply AI instructions where I can add prompts and instructions to give additional context to Copilot. So what I've done here is I've said always pick up information about dollar sales when somebody asks about sales performance. So now we know how Copilot found out that I was interested in dollar sales when there was both dollar sales and unit sales value. And that may look different for your own organization, which is why such customization options are really helpful. And of course, what I've shown today is a really brief overview of the capabilities that exist within Copilot in Power BI and Fabric. But if you're interested to explore further, we'd be very happy to connect with you after this webcast. So feel free to reach out to us. And with that, I will hand it back to Andrew to continue with the session.
Thanks, Sushma. So now that you've had a chance to see Copilot in action, you'll see some of the things in there that we were able to make use of when applying Copilot to the existing data set at that consumer pharma company. So able to set some of the data set up in the right way, adjust the data set and make some tweaks and changes to that. More work on customizing instructions, some of the descriptions that could be added to the data set. And then at points, deciding, do we want to make changes to the data set, or can we make changes to the data set without breaking what we've already got in place? Like I say, there were already things built on top of that data set. And on top then of the customization that we were able to put into Copilot, there's work then at the end of it on training the users how to ask questions to get the most out of it. So there's an extent to which you can customize the instructions, like Sushma says, telling it, when I say sales, this is the type of sales that I mean, or this is the measure that I want you to look at. But sometimes you have to train your users in, when you're asking about performance, tell me, do you mean sales performance? Do you mean shipments performance, or those kinds of things? So training the users on how to ask questions. Also then, depending on how the user asks the questions, training them what sort of things to expect. Is it going to give them something from the current report, or is it going to give them something from potentially a different page in the report or a different set of filters, depending on both how they ask the question and where they ask the question. So a bit of user training and empowerment needed to make sure that the people are getting the most from the Copilot capabilities that exist. So then when we talk about, can we do this with Copilot? What can we do with Copilot, and what might be better done elsewhere? A key part of that is thinking about, when are we best to use out of the box tools? When are we best to use bespoke tools? And here I've drawn out what are some of the advantages or apparent advantages of each. So with out of the box tools, typically people see them as quicker to get going, and they definitely can be. The caveat I give to that one is they're quicker to get going if they do what you need them to do. So it's important to sit down at the start and figure out what are the requirements for what you're trying to do. So in this case, we're working with the consumer pharma company. They had a very clear idea of what their goals were from applying AI to the data sets and reports that they already had. And in that case, maybe Copilot does allow them to get going more quickly. In other cases where you need more control over the capabilities that you want, then maybe a bespoke application is better, where you have control over exactly what capabilities you build in. Then there's things like out of the box tools will automatically get updates, or at least typically vendors are releasing new capabilities regularly into these tools. With a bespoke application, you've got to do that yourself, but the benefit there is that you're fully in control again of what you build in, and which capability your business needs next is the thing that defines which capability you build in next, rather than the vendor deciding. For out of the box tools, you're usually going to be looking at subscription-based pricing. It's not always, but we're very commonly seeing in those tools, it'll be a per month cost, very often per user per month. And again, that could be very well aligned to what you want, but it can become a bit of a struggle when you need to think about onboarding more users. Maybe you've got users who are going to use it once or twice a month, and then does it become worth onboarding them in that way? Where with a bespoke tool, very often you've got far more control over the choice of how that is costed. You can decide which capabilities to build into the model, and choose those which are aligned to the way that you want to be paying for it. With an out-of-the-box tool, there's apparently less commitment, right? You adopt it, you try it out for a bit. If it doesn't work, you can move on and build something else. The thing, again, I would watch for there is the potential lock-in. Once users get familiar with a particular way of doing things or a particular set of capabilities, even if it's not adding the most value for your organization, it can be that users get attached to that, and then you're locked into, again, whatever that subscription pricing is. With a bespoke application, you can keep any of those functionalities that people are using. You can customize how they work. You can add new capabilities on. If there's a capability that isn't being used, that's costing you money, you can take that out while leaving everything else in place. So a lot more control and choice over how things run in the bespoke scenario. And then, of course, it's not just a case of choosing one or the other at either extreme of that. Really, there's a spectrum here. So when we're talking about bespoke tools, already I've talked about bringing in different components that might be costed in different ways. Very often when we're building bespoke applications, we'll be pulling in different elements from different places. And that can be as simple as, almost the only thing we're using is the large language model. We're not training those from scratch. We're leveraging the models built by, be it OpenAI or Anthropic or Google. We're building on top of that maybe a web framework using some open source web libraries, which we're able to use and customize to exactly what we want. And there's no licensing cost to those. But maybe we're bringing in different components in different ways. On the other side of it, when you use an out-of-the-box tool, there's usually some level of customization you can apply, and that'll be different depending on the specific tool. So if you've got something like ChatGPT Enterprise, very often you can point that at your organization's documents, and it will have access then to all of the documents that you give it access to all at once. And something like Copilot and Power BI that Sushma has just shown, you can see there are different settings that you can apply to that, and different levels of settings depending on the specific tool that we're talking about. And of course, then there's kind of true hybrid scenario. Maybe we've got an out-of-the-box tool and we're using some of the capabilities from it, and we build some bespoke capabilities on top of that. Or we've got a bespoke tool that's mostly bespoke, but we bring in one or two capabilities that we're paying for to get those as out-of-the-box capabilities within a wider tool. The thing to watch for in that kind of hybrid scenario, I would always say, is you need to think carefully about what benefits and what trade-offs you're making in going for that kind of hybrid approach. If you're leveraging capabilities that you're paying exactly for out of the box, building on Bespoke where the out of the box tool doesn't do what you need it to, you could do that in a way that gives you the best of both worlds. On the other hand, you could end up in a scenario where you're using very small amounts of capabilities from out of the box tool you're paying very large amounts of money for in the middle of a much bigger bespoke system, which then becomes more complicated because you're building it around an out of the box tool. And I know I'm talking in extremes again there, maybe, and that's a very bad scenario, but you do want to think about, as you're bringing together that kind of hybrid scenario, what are you lifting from out of the box tools? What are you bringing from bespoke development, and make sure that that's carefully designed so that you're getting the most out of it. And when we get into that kind of bespoke development and using those bespoke solutions, it allowed us to deliver some specific functionality in specific customer applications. So compared to using Copilot out of the box, when we build a bespoke solution, some of the things that have been an advantage, being able to control the set of documents. So most applications, if you're giving the users a specific set of questions that they're going to ask, they don't want to go across every document in your organization. So you might want a bit more control than that. Being able to customize the user interactions, being able to add custom visualizations and charts into the tool. We've seen that particularly with kind of data and AI applications where people are asking questions, being able to build some custom visualizations into that flow and be able to control that has been really helpful. And then towards the end of my list here, things like logging, monitoring, audit, and security is something that's really important. The enterprise organizations we work with typically have some sort of enterprise level guide on what is it that we want to log, what is it that we want to monitor, what should be our audit processes. When we're building Bespoke, we're able to absolutely customize so that we hit 100% what it is that they're trying to do from an organizational perspective. And we're not limited by what are the things that the out of the box tool offers in that sense. Again, when you're trying to integrate with existing tools, as is quite common in enterprise organizations, you want to integrate not just at the high level with integrating with something like maybe a Salesforce or a Dynamics, for example, but each of those will be customized to your organization. You'll have custom fields in that you want to be taking advantage of. That's something we can do in a bespoke solution. So I'll jump quickly and show you one example we've built for a customer. I mean, again, I'm not going to show you exactly the application, but this has the same sort of user interface. We've taken their logo off what we put ours on, but it's got similar drop downs. It's got similar functionality. And this is something that we built in a scenario where we're working with another consumer healthcare company that want to understand the patterns and the opinions of their end consumers. So they've done a series of interviews with these consumers over a number of years. And they've done that for different brands. So here I'm going to ask about, it's a fake data set here. So it's a fake brand, Acedon. But you can imagine they might be asking about some of their products. I'll ask, what do users like and dislike about Acedon? They would then go in and select a specific brand from the drop down. Maybe they want to ask it about a user from a specific country. Maybe I'll just leave it open here, or an age group. So I want the older age group, the younger age group, maybe 30 to 60 in the middle. I'm just going to ask the question open here and get a response. At this stage, it's going to that filtered set of documents. So first, the only documents this has access to are those interviews. We could bring in other documents that are specifically relevant to consumer feedback, but we don't want to bring in all the documents from our organization. And here it's summarizing based on the question and based on that set of documents, filtered here specifically to that brand. And if I go to my citations here, it's referenced 5 specific documents. I could click on it here and put a document with all of the specific user interview here about the Acedon product, and take me to the page that it's referencing. So you can see there, I'm not doing it full justice here, but just to show you a couple of places that we've been really able to customize exactly the way that users are interacting with that. And in this case, it's a bespoke application with access to exactly the documents we want. We have control over the instructions that are given to the model. So it's not just the user question that's being passed, given some more context on the types of things that the users are interested in. We're also able to control the user interface and the prompt flow. And then where maybe with Copilot, we were spending a lot of time training people on how to ask questions of the model. This time, more of the emphasis is on training the users on how we want them to leverage the insight. If they're asking questions, how do they use the outputs from those questions to make decisions about their business? User empowerment needed, but maybe a slightly different spin on it this time. And so that application kind of draws out one of the other axes that you might want to think about when considering how do you build out the AI interaction for the different business cases that you're looking at. And in this case, I'll talk about breadth applications versus depth applications. So if you think about a wider application chat tool, typically those are targeting a breadth application, something like a ChatGPT, for Microsoft 365. So you'll be trying to apply that across a range of different business uses, wide group of users right across your organization, trying to allow everyone to get advantage in their role and let them come up with what is it that I want to use AI for. And for that reason, you adopt a tool or you build a tool that has really wide flexibility to the different user questions that might be asked. And there we're really delivering lots of small incremental value. Compare that to the example I've just shown. And in that scenario, we've got a very specific business case. We're going into the depth of the business case. We've got a tailored approach to how we access. In some cases, we're even building out automation and doing these things in the background. Maybe it's reviewing invoices, for example, or one that we've built with customers reviewing a purchase request in part of that process and automating that process in the background. That gives you a really fine-grained level of control. First off, we can build some of that control into the application, controlling the documents and so on. And then we can give the user more control over, I just want to look at this brand or I just want to look at this group of users. And by doing that, rather than trying to deliver lots of small incremental value, we can really revolutionize one process and deliver a lot more value by changing up how one process or one business case in your organization works. So that's covering just two of the variety of different axes that we came across. And like I say, we were talking about this and talking about the different scenarios, the different business cases that we're working on with customers. Different business cases will have different priorities and different things to think about when you're trying to decide whether to work in an out-of-the-box tool or a bespoke tool, or you're trying to go after a breadth, or you're trying to get really deep into a specific business scenario. So what I'd suggest is if you're interested to talk more about that, we'd love to hear what you're working on, and we'd love to share with you some of the observations that we have from a number of the different business cases, which is very quickly today shown a couple, but very happy to share more. So our email addresses are on the screen. Please get in touch. I would love to talk to you more. Similarly, if you're looking at using Copilot, if you want to get deeper into that question of, well, for this specific business process, can we do this with Copilot? But even into questions like how do we customize it and make the most of Copilot? How do we empower our users to do that? Again, we'd be really happy to have that conversation and to share more examples with you of some of the business cases that we've worked on, whether in Copilot or places that we've seen that it's useful to go beyond that and go into more bespoke applications. With all of that, I'll say get in touch if any of those topics are of interest. Really happy to continue this conversation. But for today, I'll leave that here and thank you for joining.